Hey guys, I'm Yemount, a hobby 3D artist. I'm a huge fan of Hades and Supergiant games. One thing I particularly admire about Hades is how the world is filled to the brim with beautiful visual effects. Seriously, I mean, just look at them. There's so many layered effects and small animating parts that bring so much life and character to Hades. Let's take the crossroads for example and try to count how many different types of effects there are near where Hecate stands. There's the moonlight beam coming from the above, very faint environmental fog that's also quite colorful, dancing candlelights near the pyre of the cauldron, squarish looking green flames near the candlelight and also near Hecate's torches, long stripy rising water steam. They're in all of the cauldrons. Water steam effect number 2 that looks like clouds or mushrooms. Boiling water effect, some looks like ripples, others look more bubbly. Next, particle effects. There are green dancing fireflies throughout. Yet another water steam particle effect rising from the cauldron. It's not just the environments either. The effects are also in the menu open and close animations, in the weapon special effects, in the glowy portrait art. It's literally everywhere. Every single thing can be a masterclass in how to craft beautiful visual effects that also adds intention, style, and life to your game. That is why I want to start this video series to dig into this goldmine of inspirations. I'll try to analyze and then replicate some of these effects in Hades with some of my own art assets. Alright, for the very first episode, we will look at Hades 2's portrait art effects. So we all know and love how sexy the gods look in Hades 1. In Hades 2, Supergiant managed to make them look even better. I know, how is that possible? Well, if you look at the side-by-side comparison of Zagreus and Melanoi, they definitely share the same art style, but Little Sis look quite a bit shinier. If we take a step back, squint our eyes, what moving parts do you see? Well, I see mainly 3 things. First, there's a bloom effect that surrounds her body, that is also kind of masked by some sort of noise pattern. Secondly, there's a subtle swiggle motion in the highlight colors in the portrait art. It's very subtle, but it's definitely there. Thirdly, there's a star-shaped highlight that only happens to the brightest part of the portrait. It is masked by some kind of directional sweep motion that only appears every once in a while. Alright, are you ready to check out the asset we will use to recreate the effect this time? Meet Zhu Ayi, Auntie Zhu. Who is she? Okay, she is an original character in the world that I'm building. She may look unremarkable, but she sells street food, fried fish to be specific, that is so delicious that it makes you forget about the problems in your life momentarily and heals the wound in your soul. I wanted to give her this glowy effects because she may as well be the god of cooking in disguise. So my Photoshop file has like 2,000 of layers because I'm bad at Photoshop and don't know how to organize things better. But when I'm done with drawing, I exported only the following maps. First, the base layer for the fully colored portrait. Secondly, there's a blurred version with a blur radius of about 30. Thirdly, I exported 2 directional motion blur maps. These will be used for the star effects. And finally, this black and white mask, which we'll use to control the wiggle motion. For the sake of the demo, I will make the effect in Blender. However, the idea should be transferable to many 3D packages offering a node-based shading flow, such as Unity, Unreal. Or if you prefer writing raw shaders, these ideas can be easily translated into raw math and shader code. Alright, let's go to Blender. Let's open up a new Blender scene. I will import the base texture that has the base colors. Let's go to Shadings view and set up camera so that we only look at the YZ plane. Go to the render view, make sure that we're using the Eevee render engine, and go to the material setting and go to render mode, switch from deferred to blended so that we can get smoother alpha around the transparent edges. So let's go to world settings, change the background color to black. By default, Blender will create this principal BSDF material for us, but we will instead use a emission shader so that we can remove the lighting effects from the scene. To make transparency work on this image plane, we're gonna drop in a mix shader node and a transparent BSDF node, and connect the alpha of the image texture to the mix factor. Alright, things look inverted, so let's just switch the socket connection here. Voila, this looks a lot more normal. Now we have transparency on the plane. To make things glow, I am going to duplicate the image texture node, import this blurred mask. This is what it looks like. So I'm gonna do something that's effectively like adding this blurred mask on top of our base color layer. I am gonna use a mix node to connect the color of the two layers together and change the blending mode from mix to add. Change the mix factor to 1. Voila, things already look quite glowy. So let's connect the output from the add to the emission and preview the whole thing. You can see that the glow is definitely working, but the alpha is wrong because we're only using the alpha from the base layer. To fix that, all we need to do is drop in a maximum node to take the max of the alpha between the two layers and connect that as the mix shader factor input. So now something funky is happening. The opaque areas where the glow exists looks way too bright. And that is actually because when we add the color from the blur mask, we forgot to factor in alpha for its color contribution. So let's drop in a multiply node to multiply the color together with the alpha and then feed it to the add node. Now this looks much better. Yay! Alright, next we're gonna try to apply a noise on top of the glow so that it looks like it flows. We're gonna first connect the alpha to a multiply node. This way we can use the factor as a glow intensity control. You can even make it black if you want. This looks like a dark halo, which is freaking cool. But for now, let's connect it to a noise texture node and connect the noise texture to a color ramp so that we can bump up the contrast of the noise by bringing the color stops closer together. Preview everything. Voila, you can already kind of see that the glow is broken apart by this noise. I'm gonna duplicate this multiply node and multiply everything by 2 so that the glow looks a little more obvious. Now, how do we make things animate? I'm gonna duplicate this noise texture node, change it from a 3D noise to a 4D noise. So 4D noise offers this W factor that offsets the noise, which makes it animate. But we're not going to directly animate the W, but instead we're going to use a mix node to connect the output from these two noise textures. Let me change the second texture to also a 4D noise. I'm going to do something that makes the noise loop. So I'm going to drop in a value node and use a driver expression to make it have the value of the current frame by typing in #frame. So let's go to our timeline. Change the end frame to 240 so that we have 240 frames in total to work with. I'm gonna drop in a divide node to divide the frame number by 240 so that we get something that goes from 0 to 1 for the entire animation. If I feed the output to the noise mix factor and preview the animation, the noise is kind of already slowly moving. To make it move faster, let's use a map range node and map the value from 0 to 1 to 0 to, let's say, 5. Let's connect it to the W of the first noise. I'm gonna do a trick to make the animation loop. So duplicate the map range. This time instead of 0 to 5, I'm gonna animate from -5 to 0 and connect this to the W of the second noise. Now if we play the animation, things are animating faster and they're looping. Great! Okay, the movement speed is a little bit too fast, so let's change the scale of both noises from 5 to 2. Let's give it a go again. Hey, that looks much nicer. Alright, I'm gonna keep tweaking the parameters until I get something that I like. It's not the most subtle effect, okay? It's probably a little too strong, but hey, for the sake of the tutorial, I think this will do. This couple of nodes for animating the noise is super useful, so I'm gonna throw them into a node group and expose a few parameters. First of all, the maximum W value, I'm gonna expose that as W scale. So let's drop down a multiply node, change the factor to -1, and then feed this value to the min of the second map range. This trick makes sure our noise loops. Okay, I'm gonna expose the scale of the two noises as a second parameter and call this noise scale. Let's go back and call this noise group animate noise. Let's put all of these nodes into a frame and call it bloom. And that's our bloom effect. Alright, next let's work on the highlights wiggle. So the main idea to make things wiggle is by applying a little bit of distortion on the UV coordinate that we use to sample the base colors texture. So here's our base texture, right? If we drop down a noise texture, use that to offset the UV texture input. Well, the distortion is definitely working, but it is way too intense. So I'm gonna add a map range node right after the noise texture and map it from 0 to 1 to -111 to 111. Now, I'm also gonna scale this by a smaller factor. So if we do 0.1, you can see that things are still super distorted, but hey, at least you can see the person there. If I use a tiny value like 0.01, now the distortion is a lot more subtle. Alright, in order to make things animated, all I need to do is replace this noise texture by the animated noise node group that we have just created. Voila! You can see that the noise is already making the whole image move. Woohoo! So I'm just gonna keep tweaking the parameter to get a higher frequency noise with faster movement. Okay, I think this is feeling alright. So now the whole image is moving. How do I mask the distortion to only where I want it to be applied? Well, let's import a mask with a image texture node. I have hand painted this mask so that only the white areas receive distortion. So I'm going to insert another scale node on the output of the noise so that we can scale the noise by the output of the mask. Now if we preview the whole thing, you can see that only the mask area is moving. Mission accomplished! You see how the girl's hair is moving, but her face is not. If you look at the mask, you'll see that only the hair is painted white. Cool. Alright, let's also put all of these nodes for the wiggle effect into a frame and call them wiggle motion. Cool, now finally let's work on that star effect. Let's import two image masks, one for motion blur 1 and the other one for motion blur 2. They look like this and this. So how did I get these masks? Well, I started from the base color in Photoshop, turned it black and white, applied a curve adjustment so that only the brightest color areas are preserved as white, everything else is black. And then I applied a blur on top with a very small radius of about 10 pixels. Once I have that, I applied motion blur on top with a -45-degree angle once, and then a +45-degree angle another time. I used a blur radius of about 200 pixels, I think. So these two angles, because of the angles, they will form these crossed shapes when added together that kind of look like stars. Let's go back to Blender. Now that we have these two masks, I am going to drop down a mix color node again and change the mix mode to multiply. If you look at the star highlights in Hades, they actually have a little bit of chroma shifting going on. In one direction they're shifted towards orange, and the other direction is shifted towards blue. So we're gonna try to replicate that. Let's select a very bright orange like this. The multiply blend mode basically allows me to tint the mask with this color. Now let's duplicate this, connect with mask number 2, and this time change the color to this cyan, very bright cyan color. Now let's add these two colors together with another mixed color node with the blend mode set to add. Yay, we have some stars! Again, if we duplicate this add node and add the star highlights on top of everything else, now the stars are on top of everything. It doesn't look very obvious yet. This is because the intensity is not quite high yet. What we can do is use a scale node after the add and really crank up the intensity to something like, say, 40. Okay, now the stars are looking super obvious. One thing you might notice is that the alpha of the star shapes does not extend beyond the base color mask, so you can use a similar approach to take the maximum alpha of the base layer and the star layer, but for the sake of the demo, I'll skip that for simplicity because I think this already looks quite nice. So how do we make the star animate? Well, we're gonna use a similar approach of applying a noise. So let's duplicate this scale node. And for the scale factor, we're gonna simply fit it to a animated noise. This is what the animated noise looks like. It's kind of gray, so let's drop in a color ramp node so that it feels more contrasty. That looks better. Let's keep tweaking the parameters. Maybe make the noise lower frequency, crank up the contrast even more. If we preview the whole thing, voila! We have some twinkling little stars. Alright, I'm gonna keep tweaking the parameters. I promise this will be quick.
2,000 years.
Okay, I'm quite happy with how it looks now. So this doesn't quite do the sweep motion that you see in the Hades portrait art. The sweep motion is actually pretty easy to create as well. So similar to how we apply a noise to the star filter, you can create a black and white mask that sweeps across the whole portrait every once in a while and multiply the intensity of the star glow with that mask. I won't go into details, but I challenge you to try to create that yourself. It's a good practice because the same ideas apply. There's a ton of animation details that still needs to be tweaked to get this effect to feel as nice as that in Hades 2. But in the interest of time, I will leave this as it is for now. For animation, the devil is in the details. You really need to get the sense of timing and the motion right. So when you do this for real, please spend the time to polish. Okay, now we have talked about all the fun stuff, the flashy part. It's time to talk about the more serious stuff, which is how to put all of these effects into the game in a practical way without breaking the performance budget. First of all, a big decision. Should all of these effects run in real time, or should they be baked into a texture? Well, both could be viable, but you may want to choose wisely based on the performance budget that you have. If it's running in real time, then the effect is computed live every single frame. I've actually built the effect in Unreal using the same ideas, and it looks pretty good. Noise is usually the most expensive part for GPU to compute, and we use quite a few different noises for the bloom, the highlight wiggle, and the texture displacement, so that's quite a bit of noise computation going on. You can work around it by caching the noise into a texture. Should definitely help with lighten the load for GPU a ton. Unreal offers a way to do this automatically for you. In fact, I think this is what this toggle here means. Another effect that's super expensive to compute real time is the blur. That is why we have all the blur effects baked into textures and imported. The rest of the computation is just a bunch of color operations such as add, mix, take maximum. Having a lot of them might add up to non-trivial computation cost, but overall, they should be fine. So real-time can definitely work if you're smart about which part to optimize. But don't forget, this is just one component in your awesome world, which I'm sure has a ton of other stuff going on at the same time. All of them will be competing for the love and care of GPU and CPU, and memory. To reduce GPU load even more aggressively, we could consider baking the whole sequence into textures. This way, nothing needs to be computed live, and the GPU would just be drawing sprites, which is a lot easier. Of course, this comes with a trade-off, which is we need to use more memory. How much memory cost are we talking about? Let's assume a 5-second 1K by 1K 24 FPS sequence where each pixel uses 4 bytes. To load all of the frame at once in memory would require 1K times 1K times 4 times 24 times 5, which equals 480 megabytes. Half a gig for a portrait art. That, my friend, is not very scalable at all, especially because there could be multiple characters in the scene whose art needs to be loaded in memory and available all at once. So I was poking around in Hades 2's asset packages when I realized how they solved this problem. These 6 PNGs contain all the assets for Melui's portrait art. All her facial expressions are here, even the ones for the hot tubs. Now, if you take a closer look, you'll see that the biggest texture is the base color layer, and it only has 1 frame. Some of the static bloom effects are already baked in there too. Now, these sprites are for the other baked effects. However, they're way smaller in dimensions than the base layer, and are broken into subregions. For example, there's one for the head, and there's one for the hand. My guess is when Supergiant built the effects in 3D software, they had several smaller panels overlaying the base panel. They applied the effects to all of these panels. This way, we can still preview how effects work together as a whole, but individual panels are baked out separately, allowing the asset atlas to be a lot more memory efficient. Pretty clever, isn't it? Well, of course, this complicates your setup a little bit. You're dealing with more panels, both in your 3D software and in the actual game. But this approach will not break the memory budget and saves so much live computation, which is always nice. Alright, that's all I have to share about Hades 2's portrait art. I had a lot of fun building it, I learned a lot, and I hope this is somewhat useful to you too. Do you think I did it? Do you think I captured the soul of the effect? Do you have ideas on how I can further improve this approach? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I'm looking forward to making more videos to analyze Hades effects, so if this sounds like the type of content you're interested in, please subscribe to stay tuned. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!